Oh, no problem. Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Happy I was able to make it back for the second round of questions because I'd love to pick up where I left off. Questions for Mr. Zabel. Before I left, I was trying to highlight the difference and distinctions between the rulemaking process and the waiver process. So maybe let me ask you, since we have a minute here, to articulate for the record your understanding of the difference between the two procedurally. The waiver process under Section 209 versus the rulemaking process under the Administrative Procedures Act.
Senator, thank you for that question. My understanding is that they both go through a comment period themselves, and for instance, the California waiver granting is similar to a SIP approval process.
So is the process identical, pretty much identical, or how are they different?
They are both rules, and the process is with respect to what the requirements are under the Clean Air Act.
Yeah, well, they're not both rules. One is a rulemaking process, one is a waiver process. So if you're not familiar with the important distinctions, let me move on. Does granting a waiver implement a new EPA policy, or is it simply granting, in my case, the state of California, the ability for it to enforce its own standards?
Similar to granting a state implementation plan, that would just be providing that state that authority.
Good. That's my understanding as well. When the EPA does grant a waiver, when does it go into effect?
My understanding is it goes into effect when it is signed.
Right, automatically, right, immediately. And as a follow-up, you may or may not know the answer to this question. What does the Congressional Review Act say about the timeline for Congress to act on a disapproval resolution?
I believe it's within 60 legislative days from the date that it is either the later of the publication within the Federal Register notice or when it has been submitted to Congress and GAO.
Right, so unless or until that happens, the waiver is in effect. Is the granting of a waiver adjudicatory?
It is a rule.
Is it adjudicatory?
It is a rule under the Congressional Review Act.
Are adjudicatory actions covered under the Congressional Review Act?
With respect to the waivers, they are a rule under the Congressional Review Act.
The waivers are not rules. That's been established. And for the record, that's why that for 50 years, including under the first Trump administration, the EPA has treated waivers, including the attempted revocation of a waiver, as an adjudication and not a rule. That is fact. Just want to end by spending a minute emphasizing, Madam Chair, why I've been so insistent and precise with my line of questioning. As I mentioned earlier, California has a disproportionate number of people who live in non-attainment areas, significantly. And on the one hand, I'm encouraged by what I heard from the nominees and from you, Madam Chair, several members of this committee, of the state and local governments having the primary role in improving air quality for multiple reasons, from an environmental protection standpoint and from a health standpoint. That's why when EPA can and should help collaborate, it should. When it may not be willing to, it certainly should not hold up states and locals from going above and beyond if that's what they choose, if that's what their constituents need and deserve, so that we can have less Californians and less Americans in the future having to suffer from cancer or chronic lung disease and other impacts of the high levels of emissions, pollutions, and air contamination that so many communities throughout California and throughout the country currently suffer from. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you both.